Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We're on the cusp of morning and afternoon, so midday. Today's webinar is avoiding project nightmares. What's important when projects go wrong? So we've got an interesting discussion today. This session is sponsored and is being run by Mail Manager, one of our national partners. So without further ado, we're going to move on, and we have two speakers today. Jacob Wardrop is the commercial director at Mail Manager, and his co-speaker is Vicky Reynolds, who is the head of digital at i3PT certification. So I'm going to hand over to Jacob, who is going to be running things today.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join this webinar. I'm just going to share my screen, so you should all be able to see a rather interesting graphic on my screen at some point. So as Phil mentioned, my name is Jacob Wardrop. I'm one of the directors at Mail Manager. Lots of you on the webinar probably won't have heard of Mail Manager before. The idea of this webinar is obviously to kind of share that, but importantly for everyone attending to get some real actionable insight and understanding around the importance of better record management on projects. Really, one of our sort of overall missions as a company is to help the construction industry become more proactive when it comes to dispute management and resolution, and we're going to talk about correspondence management today. So in terms of the speakers, we've got myself. I've already introduced myself. Now is a really good time to introduce Vicky. So hi Vicky. I think if you've joined.
Hi there. Hello.
Hi. So before we get into, I suppose, the agenda for today, it'd be really good just to, I suppose, for the audience to get to know who you are and your background, because that adds some important background for today.
Awesome. Yeah, sure. I'm Vicky Reynolds. I'm the head of digital for i3PT certification. We also have a software as a service offering called Cert Central. My background predominantly in construction has been in information management, data management. Was a BIM manager and consultant for many years, and have done some document control as well before that. A lot of my role has been, for the majority of my career, organizing information and data, developing strategies, and fixing problems when they go wrong, trying to preempt them before they go wrong.
Great. Okay. Well, brilliant. And you've appeared on a couple of events with us before, so I can sort of guarantee and stand behind the credibility of your kind of advice and guidance, which we'll go through today. So in terms of in terms of Mail Manager and Arup, I'm sure everyone on here has heard of Arup before. If you haven't, then there's a slide which runs through some of Arup's projects. Mail Manager is a business you probably haven't heard of before. We're actually owned by Arup, and the Mail Manager solution is an Outlook add-in created by Arup initially for their own engineers and their own architects, and it's now been made available to other project-based businesses who want to take a more proactive approach to email management effectively. So in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to go through a Q&A first of all, which really promotes the importance of taking your information management seriously, really, which isn't just specific to emails. I think some of the kind of outcomes of today's session is to help you kind of get your colleagues to take record keeping seriously. I'm sure all of you have got people in the business who kind of have a slightly I don't know what the word is, really lazier approach to being organized and filing. We're then going to go through some of the project checkpoints where projects can go wrong, where record keeping gets neglected, and then I suppose a bit of myth busting advice around what is and isn't a record. So ideally by the end of this webinar you've got a really, I suppose, an informed view of where projects go wrong, why they go wrong, and some advice to kind of help you make a kind of more or take a more proactive view in the future. And then on email specifically, we're going to talk through how Arup have addressed email management as a really critical part of reducing the level of risk their business is exposed to. I should point out, if you've got any questions, please use the MainStage chat facility through the browser, and we'll make sure we answer all questions kind of before the end of the webinar. So to start off, before we start talking about Mail Manager, Vicky, perfect time to bring you in and talk through, I suppose, at the moment. A project has many different stages and different points in its life cycle when things could go wrong. What's kind of your view, I suppose, on when it's most important to take stock of what's happened?
I guess it depends on the project. Complex projects need more checkpoints, and specifically ones with more stakeholders as well. It's always good to stop every now and again and look at who has what information, where they're storing it, how they're storing it, and how data and information is being shared. But to be honest, the most important thing to consider is less about the information you're collecting and more about the way that you're saving it and making sure that you can find the right information quickly and easily at the right time so that you can make the best possible decisions. So the information you keep is important, but more importantly, that information needs to be accessible and it needs to be searchable. That being said, there are checkpoints quite clearly in some legislation, specifically in the UK, and it's always good to know at what points you might be expected to hand over information for someone to review. So as an example, the Building Safety Bill in the UK, which the draft version was released in July, that has really clear gateways for specifically high-rise or high-risk residential buildings, but that is expected to be expanded as a criteria. And those gateways are at the end of the planning stage, the end of design, and at the end of construction. And you cannot progress to the next stage unless the building safety regulator is happy with the information that you have at that point in terms of health and safety, but also a few other points as well. And they can block the project. So you might have a fully constructed high-rise building that nobody can move into, you can't operate, you can't gain any profit from because it can't pass that third gateway. So at that point, it's really important that any information is highlighted to you by the regulator that you haven't included or that they haven't had in their review, you know where to find it and you can access it. So, I mean, that being said as well, continuously, it's a habitual thing, continuously knowing where you're storing your information, how you're storing it. It's best to just get into good habits.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, what kind of you're referring to there are the I suppose important points in a project's life cycle. Do you think there's a level of sort of risk of information getting missed or not properly recorded through the kind of estimating and like tendering sort of process when everyone's really, really focused on trying to win the work? Absolutely.
There are really clear points in a project that are the highest risk. And yes, they include where there are more stakeholders or people are putting their attention elsewhere. So for instance, with tenders, well, look, we have to make a decision, so we have to get this information out now. And we all know the legislation, we know how we should be sharing that information. But then if anyone who's paid any attention to, for instance, the Grenfell inquiry, will know that it doesn't always happen that way. And that's a massive risk when people are under pressure or when they're thinking about other things. Equally, though, complacency is one of the biggest issues. When you feel the most comfortable and you think that you're not under any risk at all, that's when habits start to drop and you start to lose your focus. So it really is. I know I said it before. You can overcomplicate this. You have to get into good habits, and those good habits have to be your minimum requirement, whether you're under exceptional pressure or whether you're under no pressure at all.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. I think kind of years gone by, it's almost become a little bit boring to be kind of organised, if you like. Whereas I think the kind of skills of record keeping, good administration, and being organised are definitely becoming a lot more appreciative than your kind of, your one office rogue, for want of a better phrase. In terms of I'll just move on to the next slide. So in terms of where record keeping gets neglected at the moment, you kind of referred to it a little bit then in terms of sort of when you're I suppose when you're at your most complacent, you're at the most likely of something getting missed. But I suppose, what's your kind of view, I suppose, on the sort of current pitfalls businesses are in when it comes to record keeping?
Overcomplication. People having way too many rules and structures in place. If something isn't workable in the real world, it's not going to work in the real world. And that's where it's really important that your information managers, your document controllers, A, have the respect that they deserve on site, but B, are also part of that collaborative team and that project environment, because they need to understand what everybody else is doing so that they can put the right processes in place, and processes that are going to be followed because they are logical and they provide benefit to the people that are following them. And then the other area of risk is when it's people who aren't skilled enough to be holding those positions are trying to put these processes in place. So document control is a great example there. I've met some amazing document controllers in my life. I've also met some people who aren't document controllers. They're administrators or they're graduates, and they've been thrown into that position because that position holds no respect in the project environment. So people assume it's easy and anyone can do it. That's really not the case, and that then sets you up for difficulties as well, because that person holds no authority, and they're not confident in what they're trying to push out across the project and the organisation.
No, that's a good point. I suppose to sort of counter that, you'd have some businesses who, the fact they have a document controller should, you would hope, show that there is an appreciation and importance of document control. I suppose what I'm thinking is, what about the sort of small businesses who don't have a document controller, but a project manager is expected to wear many different hats, and one of them is on record keeping?
Absolutely, yeah, that's another risk. And it's just about making sure, it doesn't matter what you call that person who's in charge of that function, as long as they're appropriately trained and they understand how to deliver that role. And what we need to be doing, making things simple or as complicated as the project requires or the organization requires. And so that's where tools like Mail Manager, come in really useful, or document management systems that have mail functions in them, because you're automatically then logging and storing things in a logical manner. So you're taking that a little bit out of the hands of the people on site.
Sure. So kind of reading or kind of my view or interpretation of what you're kind of saying is, there's some people whose the role of record keeping and document control just isn't maybe given enough respect. Some people in there who who shouldn't be in that job. And then I suppose the third one is maybe some people who don't see filing as part of it. I'm sure there's some people who don't recognise filing as part of their role.
Exactly, and also filing sometimes shouldn't be part of your role. There are systems now that can make it almost easy, simple, intuitive, and sometimes there's more investment needed on the part of the organisation to make sure that that as long as people share their information in the right place, it's then stored logically. There's a lot of technology that you can use to make it easier for people, so that they don't have to spend hours and hours in the evenings uploading. So a perfect example would be if you do any kind of snagging on site. It used to be that you'd have to go around with a digital camera and a paper form, and you would fill in the paper form, take all the pictures, and then the site managers were going home and spending 3 hours scanning and logging things on the systems in their own personal time. Whereas now
or not doing it.
Sorry, what was it?
Or not doing it,
Or not doing it, yeah, exactly. And you've forgotten the details by that point as well. So you think, why did I take that picture? What was the detail here? Whereas now we have tools that allow you to take the picture with your mobile phone, write the comment, and you don't feel like you're filing anything, but you absolutely are. The second you press submit, it goes to the people who need to see it. It's stored in the place it needs to be stored in. And so all these technology can be used in such an amazing way, and no one is going to have any qualms with that, because it instantly saves them time and saves them effort.
Yeah, no, it definitely relates to email as well. I mean, we've all got colleagues who I suppose are maybe slightly more proactive, or filing OCD ones who are spending their Friday afternoon or the Sunday nights, or whenever it is, to try and sort of get on top of their inbox, or maybe a larger group of people. And interested if there's any guests on today who have been in this position where it's kind of getting to the end of a project and it's a bit of a bun fight to then try and sort of get all the ducks in a row and everything filed and captured. So that kind of leads nicely on to I suppose what happens when projects go wrong, which sounds like an obvious question, but I think there's lots of directors, people who I suppose if the job's profitable and it's delivered, then everything else is a bonus kind of thing, and they probably don't fully appreciate the I suppose knock-on business consequences of not taking your record keeping and audit trails seriously.
Yeah, I mean, worst case scenario, people die. I mean, you look at Grenfell and the disaster there, and so much emphasis has been put on the fact that the record keeping was bad. There was no, what we now call a digital golden thread of information. The right people weren't getting past the right information to make good decisions, and people weren't sharing information in the right way. And although it's an extreme case, it's still the case. I mean, we've had similar disasters all around the world. At school in Dublin, where the side of the wall fell off, and a lot of that came down to the fact that between design and construction there were lots of mixed messages and information that wasn't passed from team to team that should have been, and a lot of that is because it wasn't stored in the right place, it wasn't easily accessible, and it wasn't traceable, and so that, I mean, that's one extreme.
Yeah.
But also that lack of communication and lack of understanding can ruin relationships between organizations. You are less collaborative when you can't send the information that you need to send very quickly. There's less communication and there's more ambiguity over responsibilities. If you're sending someone a quick email saying, can you do this? And they say yes, and then your email's archived, and at the end of the project, no one can remember who was responsible for that. That's a real problem. And there's also all the increased project costs for that management and filing as a secondary or an additional function as well. You're paying someone to go through and fix your information. And another great example of that is the handover between construction and operation. Facilities managers and asset owners spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds interpreting the information they're handed at the end of construction stage into something that they can use for operations, and sometimes filling in the gaps of data and information that they just didn't get. And we have a real responsibility to make sure that things are stored and managed properly at every stage, so that we know we're handing over the right information in the right way to the next person, the next stakeholder.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and that's not something I talk or have thought about much before in terms of a handover of sort of construction to your kind of operational phase. I think naturally we do sort of think of all of these sort of jobs, if you like, as single points in time. And I'm sure there's people on here who have, I don't want to say been embarrassed, but kind of felt on the back foot, if you like, when it comes to going back and trying to kind of find something. It's like, well, when did I send that? Why did I, why did I say that? Even being pretty, just really awkward. Even, I suppose it's akin to the feeling of going to a meeting slightly sort of, less than prepared. So, okay, no, that's really, really helpful. In terms of, I suppose the myths, I think, we always talk in construction about how we've got, your the pockets of innovation and sort of people trying to strive and stimulate for positive change, and then we've kind of naturally got, you know, I suppose the opposite of that. What do you think of it, or what do you hear and perceive to be myths when it comes to record keeping?
I mean, the first one we've touched on, which is that it's not my job. That's the biggest one. People assuming that they're not responsible for recording their own information and filing
on their own jobs. Yeah,
exactly. And then there's also the different types of communication and what weight that holds in different scenarios. So, for instance, there's a massive myth that about how much weight an email can hold. So people take things off the record on construction projects all the time, and we'll just ping emails to each other. And I've seen it with a heading, "Oh, off the record," or
really,
just just a note to say, or keep this one to yourself. And the moment that that's put into writing, it is a record. And if there's any kind of litigation, if you find yourself in court, it's evidence, and it could, in some instances, supersede what you have in your contract. So it's all about understanding the legalities around what you're saying. Now, that doesn't mean stop sending emails. They're a massively powerful tool, and sometimes that is a great way when you're in a rush for saying, okay, the stakes have changed slightly. Is everyone in agreement that this is what we do moving forward? And then if you're storing that and filing that clearly, and you have that in a place that you can access, then that's great. But it's a huge myth that you can. It's a huge myth that anything can be off the record. Nothing can be off the record in a construction project. It doesn't work like that.
I mean, do you think kind of like WhatsApp and text messages are becoming a slightly more important form of comms as well? Yeah,
absolutely. I've seen people send each other Snapchat messages on construction sites. Not very often, but I have heard of it, and that is a particular action that suggests to me that they're trying not to have that conversation tracked, which is bizarre. And
that is bizarre.
It's that understanding of what communication means, and when different types of communication are appropriate.
Yeah, no, I think totally. I think the bit which gets sort of, I suppose, our own sort of myth on this is that there's always a big emphasis on getting a contract filed and getting a contract, read and ideally kind of, understood and all that sort of thing. But I think what there generally, I suppose, isn't is in construction is kind of, it's a little bit matter of fact. It's like, well, what material is there? The project's delayed. Okay, it's delayed. How much is it delayed by? Rather than kind of, why is it delayed? Why are we using that material? And that sort of context is in your kind of off the record, emails, which people generally don't realise how important an email is until they're going to find it. And then, once they're in that position, it's too late, and it all gets a little bit embarrassing.
It's so difficult, and the other thing there is, just because something has been saved doesn't mean it's been read and understood.
No,
and that's another massive myth is, both parties have signed this contract. Both parties have read the contract. It doesn't, in a million years, mean that both parties have understood their responsibilities. And so there's some amazing new tech coming out, or that is out, that can take your contractual requirements and build them into your program. So you've got checkpoints and checklists, so you know that everyone is achieving what they said they would achieve. But on the majority of projects, that's not realistic at the moment for use. So it's about taking responsibility and saying, just because my organization has read this contract, I'm acting on behalf of them on this project. The stakes are high. I need to understand it as well. And it's amazing how many people work on construction projects and don't understand the nuances of those particular contracts that they're working under.
Sure. Okay. Great. Well, I think I suppose to finish off, we've talked about some of the kind of pitfalls, and I think the checkpoint from sort of construction to operational phase is really key. Those myths you've talked about in terms of how an email can override and supersede something in a contract is also really, really important. I think the kind of approach of it's not my job or equally I'm just not going to do it is probably, we'll all have colleagues, who kind of fit into that category. In terms of, I suppose, taking a slightly more sort of positive look at what the possibility or the way forward is, you must see some examples of businesses who are, who kind of stand out as kind of outperforming some others.
Yeah, absolutely. And it always comes down to leadership. So if you have good, strong leadership and a clear message that this is important, either on a project or within an organization, because I've seen it both ways. I've seen project participants who have come together and almost have their own set of commandments or their own culture that is separate to the organizations that they work for externally, because the culture in those organizations isn't enough. Those perfect storms where you get all of these great people on a project environment together and they develop this amazing culture. And then I've seen it where within the organization, it has the best will in the world and the best leadership, but it just cannot transfer to project environments. But where it does and where it happens in both scenarios, it's because there's a clear message, there's continuous training, and people understand their part in the picture. Also, people being held to account as well. So one thing, the very first document control job that I ever had, I used to send a league table of documents uploaded and documents named correctly out to the project on a Friday, and it became like a source of banter. Really, people would want to be at the top of the table, and then we'd start doing you had to buy drinks if you were at the bottom and that kind of thing, and it became a funny sort of culture, collaboration, team building thing rather than a chore. So little things like that are really, really important. But most importantly is just making sure that everyone knows what they're meant to be doing, and that they get a say in it as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's certainly really hit home with me, or just around the leadership point, really. So I kind of wonder how many directors have sort of said, nothing is off the record. How many directors have talked openly with teams about filing? We're naturally kind of all firefighting a little bit. So there's always a danger that if you haven't had a kind of a disaster situation happen, that you don't talk about it. So yeah, I think the sort of A, leadership, and B, accountability around, we use accountability to drive positive actions for kind of just about everything else, but probably not around, being organised and filing.
Yeah, well, as a bit of context, I mean, we're not the only industry struggling with this, and even industries and companies that you think would have it so right. So a study by Harvard recently found that out of Supreme Court opinion pieces that they had saved over I think it was up until 2013, they did, Harvard Law School did a full review of all of the source data and found that 70% of the links to external information were no longer working or no longer valid. And so that's 70% of information, evidence and stuff that we would have used in the future to help us develop law further has just gone, because instead of saving content, they were just saving links. And that's a thing with emails as well. A lot of people save important emails as a link into their Outlook. There are so many ways that can go wrong. You have to be able to export that information and save it somewhere that is safe for you. And so, yeah, it's just all these kind of things. I think we give construction a bad rap, and sometimes we do underperform, but equally we need to keep our eyes open and learn lessons from the people who are doing it before us as well.
I know what you mean. Yeah, no, I think that's true. And definitely, I think it's definitely getting better. It probably even kind of more so with everyone working kind of remotely, the importance of having stuff written down, and I suppose just for sheer volume of kind of Teams and email messages we get has probably gone up. So no, I think it's kind of, it's right to say that it's an opportunity, if you like, you know, as well as a problem. Okay, well that's great. Thank you very much. If there's any questions for Vicky, please put them into the main stage chat facility. I will try and keep an eye on that. I can see there's some which have come in. Yeah, so that's great. What we'll do is we'll kind of move on with the presentation. We'll make sure we answer all of the questions before the end of the session. But thanks very much, Angus and Edna, so far for your questions. So in terms of, I suppose, how this applies to Arup, our directors had talked about the kind of importance of being organised and the importance of filing, but that we had challenges. I think the size of Arup's business is obviously kind of relevant, because there was lots of different offices and lots of different teams who filed and organised information in a slightly different way. I think one of the key realizations we made around 10 years ago was an email is just as important as any other record. If we can get sued for it and it can be pulled up against us in the future, you know, it needs to be organised. So just like we want a contract filed, we want everything related to a job filed, because otherwise we could get in trouble in the future. So I think there was a realization, if you like, that there's a level of risk attached to email. But I think what was missing was being organised and filing as a habit thing. I think there was kind of pockets of people being really, really organised and really diligent. But in general terms, filing and being organised wasn't just part of the process, if you like. You had some people who filed really well, other people who did. Fee earners as well, who were saying we're wasting too much time looking for stuff contained in an email. We're spending too much time either searching or forwarding stuff around. I can access all of the drawings on a job. Why can't I access all of the emails? So some of the kind of key challenges we solve as a company now, because Arup have effectively made Mail Manager open for other businesses to implement, is wasted time and risk of losing sensitive information. Most businesses we speak to, if they had to go and find emails against a project, they could probably do it, but it would take a lot of time. It would be really frustrating. It'd be quite worrying, really. So Arup's overall aim was to solve these six challenges, but then enable all of the directors to kind of have a sleep at night approach to email, which they didn't have previously. I'm interested if none of those apply to any of you. I think, you know, in general, what actually happens is people receive emails and we all do slightly different things with it. So part of what we do is an opportunity to get a consistent approach to managing email. In terms of the next slide, the different ways we see filing of emails, kind of this slide here, if you imagine you've got sort of 4 people in your business and they all receive one email and they maybe all do slightly different things with it. We've got person number 1 at the top left, who has a kind of overloaded inbox, and we've all got those colleagues with 1,000 emails, and some of them probably stress you out even though it's not your own inbox, and they've got an inbox which is just overloaded and there's loads of stuff in there. Some of it needs to be filed, some of it doesn't. A lot of it is commercially sensitive and could become a problem in the future. Our second person is the red sort of padlock there, so that's someone who probably doesn't want to share anything, but kind of keeps things quite locked down so they're in their world and in their mind they're kind of fairly well organized. Third icon here is someone who is organising their inbox and is probably spending a lot of time doing it. So generally we see, I suppose in broad terms, groups of people where you've got some who don't file anything at all, don't see the need, don't see the importance of doing it. They carry risk and expose a project team to risk. And then another group of people who are filing but probably don't work as efficiently as they would like, because they're wasting, effectively they're spending a lot of time doing that. And most firms, Genza Architects recently did a study which sort of basically worked out that on average fee earners spent 2 to 3 hours a week searching for stuff in email or managing their inbox, which I think is concerning, and I think we can do a lot better. The final category is actually around attachments. So generally, document control, fairly, well embraced kind of discipline with, or not a discipline so much, a department. Lots of companies see the need for document controllers, document control systems. The industry is invested in document management systems, if you like. I mean, we can kind of debate on how well they're implemented, but there's an investment there into that at least. But generally, when it comes to attachments, if they're in an email, they'll get missed a lot, really. So the approaches we see to email are an under appreciation of the importance of attachments, just hoarding stuff in their inbox, and then if that person ever leaves the business, it's a bit of a nightmare. Somebody who doesn't want to share anything, and then you're kind of gold star filer OCD person. I'm interested if anyone on here is a filer OCD person. I definitely wasn't before I joined Mail Manager, but obviously I am now. So in terms of the actual solution, I'm just going to spend about 5 minutes going through, I suppose, what the solution is, and then kind of allow, I suppose, everyone here to kind of draw your own conclusions, really. In terms of Arup's approach to the actual challenge of, what do we do? How do we get people to file their emails consistently? We've taken the steps to recognize that email is important, but kind of how do we go about solving this challenge? Nobody's going to file their emails if we just go and ask them to. So the first thing was to connect email with the rest of their key business information, and that's what Mail Manager does. So there's a locations part of Mail Manager which nobody normally sees. It's basically just a window to where your data is stored, and I'm sure there'll be people on here who maybe you file to SharePoint at the moment, maybe you file to third-party systems like i3PT, where Vicky works, or you have a file server as well where you file your documents and contracts to. Most businesses have, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach necessarily. They could be filing to a server, to a document control system, as well as using Microsoft Teams. So in any case, this collections part of Mail Manager basically tells me where my information's stored. So I've got it's effectively a kind of mirror and looking onto my file server in this case, and I'm going to go to an example project called Fitzroy Street, and I'm just going to say, well, where are these emails stored? And I can see just here I've got a project folder structure, and if I click into emails, I've got all of the emails relating to that project. So Mail Manager is effectively acting as a bridge between all of your inboxes and where you want your information stored. Now, whether that's on a file server or in SharePoint or in another common data environment type system, the solution itself doesn't really care where you store stuff, just as long as you can store it and find it quickly. But the important thing here is that all of these emails are titled consistently, because the software is doing it for you. And if you ever wanted to get rid of this product, then you could do. All of your data is kind of lives with you in your environment. So that's kind of the connection between Outlook and where you file. In terms of how we get there, there's a number of ways you can choose to file emails. I can right-click an email here and click File, and Mail Manager will suggest to me and say, well, where do you want to file that? I can click up there to say File Email. Most people aren't going to do that. If you ask everyone to right-click or do an extra kind of step, you're going to have challenges. To prevent, I suppose, in the theme of projects going wrong, what I can do is when I open an email and click Close, sorry, when I go to reply to Byron's email here, I'm just going to click an email to Ed Sharp and click Send. I'll get a prompt which comes up which says, where do you want to file this email to? So every time you're reading or responding to an email, you're being asked to do something with it. This part of Mail Manager is a prompt and predict, and it goes to Vicky's point around making filing become a habit, because we don't think we can ask people to file emails at the end of a week or at the end of a day. We think filing needs to happen as and when you're dealing with emails, basically. Equally, if I go to an email here from Karen, and I'll just say, thanks, Karen. If I click Send, I'll get the same prompt. But one thing which I didn't mention before is every time in Mail Manager you respond to an email, it will also file the message you're replying to in one process. So I'm ticking that just for the sort of demonstration purpose, but that would be automatically ticked. And when I click Send and File, I'm going to file the message I'm sending as well as the one I'm responding to. So on every project, you have an audit trail of what you've said as well as what your partners have said to you as well. So if you ever get into a he said, she said kind of debate on a project, you've got a full record of everything you've sent as well as everything you've received. But the key thing here is if anyone's got an inbox with more than, I don't know how many I've got there, 13. So if more than a kind of handful, 50 emails, say, your inbox is a bit of a filing cabinet. The vision with Mail Manager and Objective is that your inbox becomes a to-do list. And that you only really get that by prompting people to file their emails. There's some built-in machine learning here. So if I go to right-click an email from Chris, Mail Manager learns my behaviors to help automate the process of filing. So that means if you receive an email from an engineer on a project, Mail Manager knows which project that engineer is working on because you've sent emails to them before, and it suggests that project at the top of the list. Equally, Mail Manager will look at the content of emails as well and help suggest where an email should be filed. So you never have to think about where something should be filed, and every time you receive an email from someone, the suggestions will be different based on who that person is, basically. So if you receive an email from your MD relating to salary, you're going to be told to file that into HR. If you receive an email from an engineer relating to a project, you're going to be asked to file it to that project, which really makes the filing process simple and just helps it become a habit. I mean, the majority of people, I suppose, over the last 3 years who have implemented Mail Manager have used it in the past. So businesses like Gensler, like Arup, have been using Mail Manager for a number of years. Staff have got used to it, and once this becomes a habit, it's really difficult and kind of not nice to sort of go back to the old way. So I'll just click File there. So there's a number of other things which I can sort of go through. I think the important thing here is that when I'm reading and responding to emails, I'm getting asked to do something with them, and Mail Manager's helping me, helping kind of streamline that process. In terms of the benefit to users, I suppose, and staff, searching is one of the things which I just think, why don't more people kind of get access to all of the emails on a project? It doesn't, we all work in teams in the industry. It seems to make no sense to only have access to your own inbox. You can access all of the drawings, you can probably access most of the documents, but you can't access most of the emails. So what we've done is develop a search platform which allows you to search for any email across the business. Now, if any of you have had colleagues who have kind of unfortunately left the company or been off work, we know at a practical level that presents challenges. So there's a few sort of day-to-day examples where this just makes people's lives easier the next day, basically. So what I've got here is a search tool which allows me to search through thousands of emails based on which projects I'm working on. If I click on, say, Gensler, for example, one of our clients, I can see all of the emails we've exchanged with Gensler, whether I'm included in them or not, whether Suba has left the company or Grace has left the company or not. It's just everything filed against that project, and it becomes a kind of library of knowledge, really, which you become very reliant on. If I ever have a client on the phone, I want to say, well, if Gensler are about to call me, I want to see what have we said to Gensler recently, and I can really quickly see what correspondence has happened with them. If there's a payment issue on a project, I can type in invoice, and Mail Manager's searching all of the emails which contain the word invoice in. So it's just immediately shortening my the steps involved in me getting to the information which I need to kind of do my job, really. We had a client come on board yesterday called Tudor. So if I just type in Tudor there, I can very quickly see any correspondence with one of our new clients, Justin Tudor, relating to that agreement. And I haven't been included in this. Without Mail Manager, it would just be impossible to kind of get access to that. So whether you're trying to find an email relating to a drawing, a set of meeting notes, a colleague's left, kind of the detail and context about your projects is normally in your inbox, and if it's not in your inbox, it's in one of your colleagues, and this shortens that gap for you. In terms of implementation, the kind of key unique point about Mail Manager is that you can be set up with it in 90 minutes, basically, and it then just starts learning your behaviors to streamline the filing process. Most systems of this nature require a much sort of greater degree of change management, which isn't a bad thing, necessarily. but we do see a kind of a massive benefit in being able to address a problem like email in 24 hours, ideally. So in terms of, that's kind of a short glimpse of the actual solution itself. In terms of the kind of actual output, obviously we aim to get everybody filing, so I think those 6 ticks to indicate everybody on a project team filing, and for you to have some confidence in retrieval, the ability to find any email in 3 clicks, and one place for all of your information. So that's that. I think in terms of sort of next steps from here, if there's anybody who would like to learn more about Mail Manager, we'll certainly be in touch with you to arrange a more kind of a more detailed demonstration of the product to understand if it can be a fit for you. We then have the option to trial Mail Manager as well, which lots of people do. So there's probably about 30 businesses in construction implementing Mail Manager, and there's probably about sort of 50 a month who are continually trialing it. So that's probably enough sort of waffling from me. I've got there's some questions which have come in already, so I'll take those, and then it's just a call for questions really. So again, thank you everyone for your time, and just happy to take any questions at all. So there's a question, hi again Vicky, there's a question which has come in from Edna, which is: corporate memory is retained through our case management system. Also there's a concern for empty office blocks which can be wholly or partially converted to residential purposes, wider development. Okay, and then there's another question which says, hi all, this came in for around one of your slides, Vicky, which says, mustn't the data protection officer conduct audits and have a clean desk policy? I don't know if you've got any thought on that, Vicky.
Yeah, absolutely. They should. There's a difference there between the physical information that's being kept and stored and the digital information. So both are important, and both are important to be filed and shared. And actually that then raises a good point about how we bridge that gap between the two. And going back to Grenfell again, we found out recently that one of the project managers I think it was just after the police had come to do a sweep of the project office, disposed of about 40 notebooks just by popping them in the bin. And that's the kind of stuff that would be much harder to do in a digital environment. So there's the data protection officer very much responsible for things like clean desk policies and all that kind of good stuff. But we have to make sure that we're storing things in the best way for the best outcomes.
Sure. Okay. Great. And then there's another question. Hi, Angus. Thanks very much for the question from Harley and Hemingway, LLP. So presumably Snapchat and, sorry, this isn't a reflection of the words, it's my reading. Presumably Snapchat and WhatsApp and Twitter are all classed as evidence. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if you do, Vicky.
If they're searchable and findable, they're absolutely used as evidence. I think an important thing to note there, and I think it has already been pointed out, that there's some of those platforms are encrypted end to end, so that the information might not be accessible. Also, the information is owned by the private company, who can choose to hand it over or not hand it over. It's completely up to them when it comes to legal matters. And there was, I think, there was a scenario around the 2016 election where there was a Twitter user who was coming up as one of the biggest influencers around Brexit, around the UK election. Every piece of research that was done, his Twitter handle kept coming up. It was something really generic, like John Smith or something. And by the time all of those things were over, they went back to check out the Twitter account, and it had completely gone. There's no reference to that handle, to any of the information on that account. Twitter don't know who had that account and who was leading it. So yes, that information can be used, but it's not always accessible. So it's a very difficult, it's a very nuanced subject, and I could talk about it for hours, but it's not.
I suppose what you're kind of saying is it's dangerous to assume it isn't going to get brought up, because some people might say, it's encrypted, so it's never going to get brought up.
Yeah, exactly. You can't assume either way. We're in a very bizarre place in history at the moment when it comes to data and information, and you find that different legal scenarios have different outcomes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And information can be accessible one day and not accessible the next, and there are so many different factors involved in that there's very little way of being able to say yourself, right, that will be there in 5 years, that won't be there in 5 years. And so it's
very true. Okay, another question from Angus: can you talk about costs, SMEs and PLCs? So yeah, certainly, Angus. In terms of, I suppose, the sort of scale of Mail Manager, we've got large businesses using it, but the majority of our clients are kind of between your sort of 10 to 100 people. Typically, that's kind of, I suppose, certainly where there's the highest volume of clients. So probably of, I mentioned 30 clients a month implement Mail Manager. It's probably about 20 to 25 of them are between sort of 10 and 100 employees. So this certainly is really, really relevant for small to medium-sized businesses, predominantly because you don't need a kind of large IT department to set it up, to be honest. So because of a product simplicity, you don't need or have a requirement for that level of technical expertise internally. So the costs vary based on the number of people, and they kind of start from around £13 per user per month, and then go down to kind of I think it's around sort of 7 or 8, depending on the number of licenses. There's different options as well. So we have some clients who trial Mail Manager and then use it on a monthly basis, month to month, a bit like kind of Netflix, and then obviously other multi sort of term options as well. Question came in from Lee McKinley. Hi, Lee. What is the Mail Manager protocol and functionality for dealing with attachments? So really, really good question. It kind of refers to, I suppose, one of the problems I mentioned earlier. The answer is it's really up to you. So the two options are you can have staff prompted to file attachments separately to emails. So if they receive a contract and you don't want them to put that in a correspondence folder, they'll get a prompt to do that. Or you can set a default where the attachment gets filed as a separate document, but in the same place as where the email came. So it's kind of that's really up to you. Question from Angus, no, not a question, sound really useful. Thanks, I'll be in touch. Very good, thank you. Duncan Stewart, how does Mail Manager deal with email trails and multiple emails of the same title? Really good point. I think sometimes some people think I only want to file one of the email trail, which is just, completely ridiculous, because as soon as you respond to an email, you can change what's below it, which I don't know if anyone's ever had anyone do that to them, but the point is that if you're to a point where, from a legal point of view, and you're retrieving information, you need to prove that information is authentic and is kind of in the original state it was received in, basically. So it's really important from a Mail Manager point of view that every email is filed as an audit trail, but then in the search you see the most recent one and then can sort of scroll down the conversation. So from a usability point of view, you see the most recent one, but from an audit trail point of view, you need to see and you need to have every part of that conversation. Not sure if there's any other questions, but thanks very much for the kind of engagement and stuff which has come in so far. As I mentioned, we've run proper demonstrations of Mail Manager which allow you to compare it to how you work at the moment, and then there is also the option to trial Mail Manager and test if people are going to use it and prove the business case really before taking it any further. I don't think we've got any other questions which have come in. Delighted to, I think we've all had lots of Zooms and Teams webinars which have kind of probably run on and on, so delighted to have one which is finished roughly on time, if not early. So thanks very much, Vicky. I mean, you've kind of always bring credibility and some kind of genuine insight to these events, and we're very lucky to kind of have you take part in them. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. I'm going to try this networking thing because there's networking lounges. So I'm going to try and join one of them. I've never done anything like that, so that's a good first for today. But thank you everyone for taking the time to join the webinar. Thanks again, Vicky. Cheers. All right.
I'm just going to jump back on and say thank you to Jacob and Vicky. Jacob, what I would ask, if you guys can post a link, contact details in the chat function, the event function and the main stage function, so that people know how to get in touch with you, I think that would be useful. But as you've heard, I think they're heading over to the networking lounge. So if you do want to engage with them, if you've got a question that you'd like to put to them specifically, then why not head over to the networking lounge? You can do that. Click on the left-hand side. You can see there's a networking lounge with a little crown with now on. Click on there and click through to the networking lounge. Just very quickly to finish off, we obviously have a very full program of events, a number of one-day conferences and webinars coming up this week. Garden communities, big projects there, obviously all needing Mail Manager software, no doubt about it. We have another one that's slightly unusual with utilizing technology to transform the planning process. Thursday, the 5th of November, next week. Quite an interesting one there again, that's going to talk a little bit about the technical side of things, which is a theme that we're looking into now as we all delve further into the digital world and our IT skills improve. And we have another one there, future trends and major development projects, co-living. That's another interesting sector there. So thank you for supporting today's webinar. Thank you to Mail Manager. Really interesting to hear. I'm heading over to the networking lounge. Might see you there. Thank you.